Good evening. I'm going to go ahead and call tonight's meeting of the Kalispell Planning Commission to order and look to for a roll call.
Rory Young.
Here.
Tim Stockland.
Here.
Pip Burke.
Here.
Shelby Odell.
Here.
Doug Kaufman.
Here.
Joshua Borgart.
Here.
Chad Graham.
Here. Move into election of officers since we're starting a new year off. I guess before that I want to welcome Ms. Odell to the planning board and hope you find your time on here to be educational and fun, and look forward to doing this with you. So
Thank you.
I'm going to look for nomination for president.
I move that Chad Graham be nominated for president.
Second.
Seconded? Okay, motion is seconded. Any discussion on that? No. Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, I'm going to open up nominations for vice president. Nobody jump on it.
Do you want to do it again, Doug?
I'll do it if no one else wants to.
I would move Doug Kaufman for vice president of the commission.
Second. Okay, seconded. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that business is taken care of for another year. I'm going to look for a motion for approval of minutes.
Move for we approve the minutes for April 9th, 2024 as published.
Seconded.
Motion is seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, I'm going to move in tonight to hear the public. This would be the time where anybody in attendance in the audience could give us public comment on any item not currently on tonight's public hearing. If there is any public comment, please step to the mic and state your name and your address. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close hear the public and move into tonight's public hearing. There's one item. File KCU-24-01. Brenton Battles has submitted an application for a conditional use permit for the construction of a parking lot at 1825 Airport Road, the Kalispell City Airport, to be associated with a new experimental aircraft association training and educational facility. Staff report.
So thank you, Commission. As you mentioned, Brenton Battles has submitted an application for a conditional use permit for a parking lot at the city airport that would be tied in with the new Experimental Aircraft Association Training and Education Facility that they're looking at locating on the property. It'd be an approximately 32-space parking lot. It'd be located to the northwest of the northern end of the runway. The use as a training facility is permitted in the I-1 light industrial and P-1 public zoning districts. The parking lot's generally a permitted use under the zoning ordinance, but is listed as a conditional use through the airport affected area ordinance due to the location of the parking in the runway protection zone. The facility building itself would be located just outside of that protection zone. It's just a shot looking north. There was an existing building that used to be on the property that was torn down, and the foundation being replaced with the parking lot extending off to the north of that. The actual location of the building would be slightly off of that due to that runway protection zone. So the building location needed to be shifted slightly. As I mentioned, it's in the I-1 P1 zone. Commercial school is the category that the use would be in. It's permitted use in that zone, both those zones. The growth policy shows it as industrial and city airport, and rezoning of the property isn't necessary for the proposed use. The zoning ordinance does incorporate the Kalispell City Airport Affected Area Ordinance, which is Ordinance 1745 and was adopted in 2014. It incorporates it by reference. It establishes various zones around the airport, most of which address limiting the height of buildings and other objects to help protect flight paths of aircraft. At the ends of the runway, there are areas designated as the runway protection zones, or RPZs. In those zones, potential uses are rather limited. One of the allowed uses is a parking lot, which is a conditionally permitted use. The RPZ at the north end of the airport is shown as the trapezoidal gray area in the diagram. In addition, the property would be in a visual approach zone, which limits the height of objects to below a 20-to-1 slope, beginning a certain distance off the end of the runway. This is showing the overall layout. Was designed per the zoning ordinance. You can see where there would be the existing, or would be the new building being proposed in here, with the parking running up to the north. Wouldn't run necessarily all the way to the north of the existing paving that's in place. Basically be a two-way driving aisle with 9-foot by 20-foot parking spaces. There would be water and sewer that would be coming through to serve the building. The parking lot wouldn't be utilizing either one of those services. The paving would be incorporated into the overall storm drainage design for the airport, and there wouldn't be any new storm facilities that would be required as part of it. And overall, the property's flat without any environmental restraints, such as floodplain or other issues that we would need to be concerned with. The primary issue that came up as part of a review is the old existing pavement that hasn't been maintained and is in a failing condition. The alligator cracking and general degradation does not make it an acceptable surface. So the paving would need to be repaired or replaced with an appropriate design to be designed and submitted by the applicant for review and approval by the Site Review Committee. And they have submitted some proposals for that. And we're currently looking at the proposal for a 2-inch lift that would go on the surface. With that, staff would recommend that the Kalispell City Planning Commission adopt staff report KCU 24-01 as findings of fact, and recommend to the Kalispell City Council that the conditional use permit be granted subject to the 11 listed conditions, and be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Lighting. I know that one of the 5 talks about the height of the lighting. Is that ever going to interfere with the flight path?
Right. Well, they're not providing for any pole lighting on there. We included it in there just to make sure it was covered, particularly
Okay.
because of the height restrictions
wasn't
that are
just
tied to
something that
that,
was-
but there weren't any shown on their submitted plans.
Okay.
Well, I was going to ask, is it needed even? I mean, is this a lot of the stuff that's going to take place in this building? It's going to be during the day, I'm assuming, or
I'm sorry, I missed the last part we said there.
a lot of the stuff that will happen with the experimental aircraft or the use for this, I'm assuming would be during the daytime anyhow, with lighting.
Oh,
being
in
needed?
all likelihood, right.
Yes, okay.
So,
So there's no commercial regulations that need to change from the
No,
parking
no.
structure? Okay.
Any other questions? I'm gonna go ahead and open this item up for public comment. If there's public comment, step to the mic and you state your name and address.
Good evening. I'm the applicant, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I appreciate the help of the planning office, and we're looking forward to being able to start construction here right after the 1st of June.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none. Get a motion from the board.
I move that the Kalispell City Planning Commission adopt staff report KCU-24-01 as findings of fact. Recommend to the Kalispell City Council that the conditional use permit be approved subject to the 11 listed conditions.
Second.
Motion is seconded. Any discussion?
This is specifically for the parking lot, not the building that's going up yet. Just the parking lot. Okay. Like making sure I'm following along.
Yep. Any other discussion? Motion or roll call?
Joshua Borgart,
Yes.
Rory Young,
Aye.
Tim Stockland,
Yes.
Tip Burt,
Aye.
Shelby Odell,
Aye.
Doug Kaufman,
Yes.
Chad Graham.
Aye. Motion carries. That concludes tonight's public hearing. When will this be in front of the council?
So that would be on the June 3rd city council agenda.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and close tonight's public hearing and move into old business.
Okay, we had two items at the last planning commission meeting. So there was the Rodosevich annexation off of 3 Mile. That annexation was approved at the council meeting on May 6th. We also had the Tronstead Meadows Whitetail Crossing project. Because there was the growth policy amendment process that we did there, there was a resolution of intent that the council adopts that sets a public hearing. And that public hearing was set for May 20th. So that's coming up next Monday. And then council action would be expected on June 3rd for that.
Okay, new business.
So next month, we've got 4 items that we're planning on. So there is an amendment to the West Side Parking District, which is the high school parking district, adding a block face there right between Elrod and Flathead High School. There's also 2 annexations. One is for Greater Valley Health, which is the old Forest Service building down on 3rd. A portion of their parking lot wasn't actually in the city. It's in a wholly surrounded area behind Carver Engineering. So they'd be bringing in the full property into the city as part of the remodel project they're doing. And there's also a small annexation off of South Woodland Drive that Joe Gardner was bringing forward, and that would be creating a new building lot behind an existing house between it and the slough. But access back in there would be able to be done with the annexation and boundary line adjustment. And then the 4th item would be, depending upon how the work session goes, the Bloomstone PUD amendment and their Phase 4 plat.
Okay. So before I adjourn, we're going to be moving into a work session after adjournment on files KPUD 2401, KPP 2402. It's a request from Kalispell National Multifamily LLC for Bloomstone PUD amendment, which includes applications for a planned unit development amendment to the overall Bloomstone PUD and major preliminary plat on approximately 16.6 acres of land. Before we move into the work session, is there any discussion from the commission?
At the moment, I'm not going to be able to make the next meeting next month,
Okay.
so.
Me neither.
Okay.
Here.
All right. We're adjourned. Go ahead.
Ready? Okay.
Yep.
So, anytime we've got a new PUD or a major type of PUD amendment, there's a work session that's provided for in the zoning ordinance. Work session is really kind of intended for 2 things. One is to just kind of get it out there. If there's any public comment, get the public involved. It's an educational purpose with that. It's also an educational purpose with the commission. So usually PUDs involve a little bit more complicated developments. It's an opportunity for the board to get familiar with it, to see if there's any issues that maybe the applicant needs to work on with additional information or with tweaking anything. And that's the purpose for tonight. It's just kind of stepping through what they're looking at, and then to kind of elicit whatever comments you may have, answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I was just going to step through what we're looking at. Bloomstone, as people are probably aware, it's just right to the west of Kid Sports, between there and the bypass. Southern border is right on 4 Mile Drive. Several of the earlier phases were done. I'll step through those in just a minute. There's water and sewer within the development. Roads, 4 Mile is existing. That's a minor arterial. You'd also have the extension of tree line coming down from Old Reserve Drive and continuing that down. That would be a minor collector. It's just a shot to the property. It's currently zoned R4 with the planned unit development and existing planned unit development overlay. There's kind of a long history on this whole section. It was all school trust land, so it's owned by the state through a Department of Natural Resources. And about 25 years ago or so, they did a PUD that covered 3/4 of that section. Kid sports was split out as something separate, and that was broken into 3 pods. And so there was a B5 pod that became Costco, Lowe's, Cabela's out in front. There's an R5 pod, which is a residential office type of zone. That's where you're seeing those like Glacier Eye Clinic, number of the other offices, as well as Glacier High School. And then there was a residential component, which is where the Bloomstone development is.
Is that still set up that way?
Yes, it's still part of the same PUD. And depending upon where you're at, the ownership can be a little bit different. For a lot of that, especially in the commercial areas, it's owned by the state still, and it's a long-term lease. When it came to kids sports, that was something that got transferred to the city. And I think that may be like a 99-year lease or something on the property. But then I think that there was a land swap with the residential areas, so that there would actually be ownership on that. So the actual ownership got mixed up, but that existing framework for the overall PUD was in place. The Bloomstone PUD replaced that for this section, so it was, I guess, a sub-PUD specific to this portion of the overall PUD that covered the entire Section 36.
Yeah, it was originally the Section 36 PUD, and then there was a period of time there, because basically the revenues and the income of this go back to the schools, because it was school trust land. There was a point in time where DNRC actually did sell this particular area fee simple. I think that was a period of time, and then since then they don't do that. It only can be lease land. So there was a period of time where this land was bought by a private developer as fee simple, like 2006-07, and then they came in with their own PUD, Bloomstone PUD, overlaid the Spring Prairie PUD.
Does it still fund the school trust?
This wouldn't, nope, because they got the money up front when the
I see.
land sold.
Yeah.
Right.
But the areas that are still owned do get that as part of the school trust. So as far as the growth policy, it's designated as high-density residential, which allows up to 20 and actually even up to 40 units per acre in that designation. Just kind of zooming in a little bit on the Bloomstone area itself. It was originally approved in 2008 for a total of 569 units, which was about 6.7 units per acre based on 85 acres in the Bloomstone PUD. As you're stepping around, you've got the apartments and some of the Z lots, which were detached single-family, smaller ones, up in this area. Phase 2, which is developed, and then Phase 3, which is probably about a third to half developed with homes, something along those lines in that section. This corner up here is actually separate. This Frontier Village that wasn't part of the Bloomstone PUD. So then the Phase 3 through 6 preliminary plat was first approved in 2017 and then renewed, I guess, in 2021. Again, Phase 3 has been final platted. What they were originally looking at was, again, the Phase 3 was single family, Phase 4, 5, and 6 being multifamily around the southern and the western portions of the property, and then with the large remainder area in the middle that they hadn't platted. So what they're doing now with this new plat is it would extend that Phase 4 into the remainder area. So Phase 4 became larger, and Phase 4, and it would also include an unplatted Phase 7, by the way. The remainder would be considered a Phase 7. Phase 4 was originally 104 multifamily units. In this new proposal, that would be 135 attached single-family townhome type of units. Phases 5 and 6 over here were originally 214 multifamily, and that would bump up to 288 multifamily. There wouldn't be any other changes associated with that. The platting would remain the same, other than actually reducing the number of lots that were being used as part of that and platting it all as a single phase. But that would have a bit of an increase in the number of units. The Phase 7 area would be planned for 65 attached single-family townhome type of units. So the net change in the number of units from the existing approval would be 569 total units to 702 total units, which would be a mix of 384 multifamily and 318 single-family, which would bump it up to 8.2 units per acre for the PUD, which is well below the 20 units per acre, which would be allowed under the growth policy. Again, Phase 4 has the 135 townhome units. They're in 2 and 4 unit configurations, generally about 20 to 35 feet wide on the west. And I guess just to orient on here, this is Tree Line and 4 Mile Drive coming this way. The other side of the page is going to be an exhibit for the driveways that come in. Again, generally 20 to 35 feet on the west and in the southern area, generally 45 feet wide on the north and the east. The southern portion would be accessed through a 30-foot wide alley, 20-foot wide paved, which would come down into dead ends. There's a little bit of work I think that might need to be done in exactly how those dead ends come into play. There'd be some concern about dead end water lines, so it may wind up looping or doing some other type of reconfiguration. We also need to have the fire department weigh in as to whether or not they would accept that as a fire turnaround. So those would be subject to a little bit of change on the ends. But you would have those alleys come down. They would be served by sidewalks on one side. There'd also be a connection that would come out from the main road into that alley with some visitor parking through that stretch, and private. And so, going back, I guess, as far as the roads, probably most of the roads, at least from this section down, would be private, probably also including all of that. So probably the only city street might be coming down through this way, with everything else being designated as private in terms of development and maintenance.
I think it's important to stop there for a minute too, because it's a bit unique, because it's pretty dense single family, but the way, for example, that U shape goes through, I'm sure some of the engineers on the commission see that actually wouldn't meet our city standard as far as radiuses and such. That's why in order to do something like this, it could meet fire department access, our widths and things, but we wouldn't allow that as a city street to own and maintain. So you would have a public utility easement for water and sewer, but really the only public road portion would be there on the north, and everything to the south would all be private. So it's a bit unique, so.
So does that mean no snowplows? No city snowplows?
Exactly.
Yep.
Wow.
It would all be private, just
City
like
garbage?
essentially imagine it as being like multifamily site with a private drive going through it. It does, that loop road is 60 feet and it's developed to a city standard to a certain point. And then that southern portion with the private alley going through, imagine the PUD we did with Starling in the Vooners. I don't know if you recall that. They've got the townhouse units fronting Stillwater, and there's an alley behind, and then the public street is behind that. So it's kind of a mix of a couple things we've seen lately, but it is a bit unique. So, dissect it.
So this is going to get back to the discussion that we had last time, where an alley is not a city street, but we're allowing property to be developed on an alley that doesn't front on a city street.
Right, and in a PUD, because you can ask, and they've asked for that deviation coming through there, is that, based on an appropriate design, you can get away from that. If it was a straight subdivision, you'd be absolutely right. You can't get into that. But in a PUD, that's something that can be discussed and can be granted, subject to whatever conditions might be appropriate for it.
And they are fronting 4 Mile, which is a city street. But they're accessed off the alley. It's the same discussion we had,
Creekside was the one.
Creekside, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And with the main difference, again, being Creekside was not a PUD, if I remember correctly. It was straight subdivision.
So
they're proposing 20-foot paved
That was,
for
yes.
accesses it down.
Yep.
for a community. So it just, I don't know. I don't want to complicate life too much, but if that Z road that runs through there is the city street, why doesn't that have 200-foot radiuses on it?
Because They're three leg, right?
Which part of it are you talking about?
Next he's talking about as we're coming through, if we did that.
Yeah, because we've used those as intersections.
So who owns the intersection?
That'd be the next question.
Yeah, so I mean, we would own the public portions of that. So as you go through it, like where that is, that would be public. And as you go up, that would be public. And then as you go over.
Well, I guess just to be clear, who owns the intersection? Who owns curb, gutter, and sidewalk within? There are 4 legs to
That
that
spot right
intersection.
there.
Where does private ownership start?
We'd probably cut it off at the radiuses or something similar to that. We'd want to maintain the sidewalks through there probably, but yeah, is there a specific concern within that, or?
No, it just seems like the fact that they're taking on private streets is an interesting discussion, but it means that by creating that as an intersection, which isn't, either it is an intersection or it isn't. And if it's not an intersection serving 2 private streets, then it needs to have a 200-foot radius. And the same with the one up at the top. So it feels like the city are taking on something that doesn't meet the city regulations.
For what reason?
So.
But if the owners are taking on the
this
city's.
is something we have done things similar like this before, where we put in the T intersections, because then it's viewed as an intersection. The radius is for curves, and so we understand that at intersections we have, like per our standards, there's like the 15-foot, or I think it's 15 and 20-foot radiuses and stuff, and so we'd apply those standards rather than just a curve where we would need that 200-foot, because we're assuming traveling speeds rather than a full stop condition and then move.
So on that way, the little red dot is, that is a future street going through the will be a city street though.
That's the intent.
And that connects to a city street?
We would assume so, yeah.
Yeah, they've done some future, that phase to the north will be lower density, single family. So that street will go through, and you could see it ties in, PJ move, right? There's another city street already, right there. It'll connect in there, and then that'll come to the west down the tree line as well.
That one.
Yep. So it'll roughly lay through like that. But yeah, those will be city streets tying into a grid pattern development in that area.
And the private streets, the utilities will still belong to the city?
Yes.
Sewer, water, and storm?
Not the storm, but the sewer and water would.
Storm within the right of way belongs to the city.
Within the right of way, yeah.
Yeah.
But we have to maintain the water's ours always, and then the sewer, the state would probably or fairly certain the state would require us to own that because it's serving multiple property
Okay,
owners.
so the storm within the private streets belongs to the homeowners association. But the storm within the city street belongs to the city.
Correct.
I see nothing that could go wrong with that.
So with that,
Right. What's the
well,
No kidding.
I'm wondering, like, with our MS4 permitting and stuff like that for our testing, if you're talking about the storm sewer, we generally try to go through and maintain that stuff so that if we own the street, then whatever's happening with our testing that we're doing, it's our city street. But if we're having private alleys or private streets even, that we don't have control over on that when it comes to, that's just the one example, but
So I'm
It's
assuming
no
that.
it's no different than a parking lot in a multifamily site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there'll be a bunch of conditions in the preliminary plat that deal with that, right? Like who owns what and who has a responsibility to maintain. And I'm assuming there's gonna be a waiver of right to protest or several waivers.
Well, that's what we're talking through right now. That's why we're still working through this, and but that's why we're presenting it. And I believe initially, PJ, that whole north section we were talking about being city,
From here up.
from
yeah.
there up, and then just from there south and being able to delineate a little better. But we had some concerns about, from city ownership perspective, that western leg, right? Show them right
Here.
there. And how that functions. So we've been thinking that portion would need to be private as well to be in alignment with our standards and how we would typically do things on a city street. But that's, like I said, that's why we're here to talk about it. And they have a number, the density mine, it's a unique product. between attached, detached, you know, that the western leg of homes there. What's interesting about that as well is kind of going back to what you were mentioning about those houses on the south side that front 4 Mile. Those houses are actually fronting tree line, right? Those are the more kind of front porch on the street, very urban design, and they're accessed off of the back. So there's no front garage coming off a tree line. They're all accessed off the back, but the front is their own tree line. So they're a through lot, which typically we don't have through lots as well. So, but they're trying to get that kind of more urban house on the road design.
He was jumping ahead in my presentation. That was the next thing I was going to say. But yeah, working around there, that is kind of one of the unique things with this, you know, partly due to some of the topography, partly due to just the dimensions that they're working with. But they are through lots, you know, tree line's a collector that's coming down, so you wouldn't expect to have driveways coming out on the tree line in any case. But that, you know, that urban look, that row house type of look, even though they're not true row houses going down, is part of what they're trying to achieve coming down this side. And then you would have all the driveways accessing in off of this internal street. I can't remember if I mentioned they would have, you know, two the visitor parking areas. One would be in front of the clubhouse. One would be right off the alley area down here. And, you know, again, this is the clubhouse area. They'd have a number of amenities in here. There was basketball court, dog park, pickleball court through that area. Details that we nail down through the Parks Department, but that'd be kind of the design concept at this point.
What was the answer on trash collection again?
We need
Of
to
whether or
get-
not the city would provide it?
Yeah, will the city provide it? I got the answer was no on plowing on private streets, but what about
Correct,
trash?
yeah. I'm not sure why we wouldn't look at it in what we're servicing, yeah. I mean, if we can't access it, then we can't access it.
Correct, yeah.
So I'm looking at that parking space down on the south side. Is that accessing on, yes, is that accessing onto the private road on the north and the south, or just from the south?
No, yeah, I'm not sure if it's not real clear up there, but the extra parking through here, you've got the road that loops through this way and the driveway. There'd be a connection that would come through this alley. And then that parking would be off of that between these townhomes right through here. So there would be a drive-through connection that
Okay.
would come through there.
Thank you.
I'm also looking at the dead ends and wondering, is it possible maybe to turn those into like small cul-de-sacs to make them easier to turn around for some folks? Because those, maybe 2 lots right there at the end on both sides, maybe there's 3 on the other side, on the left side, that doesn't look very accessible for like a fire truck. Those things are not exactly,
Right, and we
flexible.
haven't had the fire department weigh in on it
Not
yet.
yet,
And
okay.
so there'd be a few different, I mean, part of it depends, you know, they can work sometimes with hammerheads where, you know, you would kind of pull in and do kind of like a Y turn or something and come
yeah.
out. This may be acceptable to them with this. You know, with the water lines doing, you know, not wanting the dead end lines, but potentially doing a loop system through there could do that. There's also some ideas of just turning those ends into single family or true duplex lots rather than having individual sublots coming down. So, we'll work with them and kind of see what's be the best solution coming down there once we kind of get it towards the public hearing time.
well, in worst case scenario, they can pull into the private drive back into where the fire's at, you know? Probably not.
Yeah, as we get forward, obviously, we do have the engineer, the architects that are here. They'll be able to kind of paint the picture of what they're after with the development. I know this site does have a lot of topography they're working with as well, which makes it kind of difficult to, you know, the density they're aiming for as well as topography and how do you get it on here. So as we get to a certain point, if there's any questions directly for the engineers and all that, they're here, so.
Yeah, and just to be clear on that, you know, there was a lot of topography, there was a lot of earth moving that kind of went on through this here. Generally, you had a pretty high hill that kind of came down, that got cut down with even putting 4 Mile Drive in and further down. They probably do need to update the geotech because of that. We were looking for potentially just a cover letter accepting what was there, but it sounded like with the amount of cutting that's been done, they're probably going to need to do some updates in the geotech report itself before we move forward on things. Yeah, I'll just go back to this here real quick. This is kind of showing the full version of those accesses coming off onto that interior street, shared driveways, and kind of showing how some street trees and so forth would go in. And I kind of zoomed in a little bit here, but you can kind of see the shared driveway design that would come in. So you'd have two units would be sharing the driveway at the street, and then would kind of widen out, kind of an hourglass shape, half hourglass shape that would come up. That it does allow for some street trees that would be coming through. I'm not sure if it hits the exact ratio that we normally look for, but they also showed where you'd have some of the services would come in and so forth. We would probably be looking for similar type of shared driveway layout on the other units as well. But this is just the detail that they were showing to show how that would potentially function.
PJ, so where that widens out, that still meets the 2 parking spaces per. Do townhouses get a different?
No, townhouses have 2, but typically what you'd have would be a 1-car. And here, I'm not sure if they're looking at technically a 1 or 2-car garage, but in a typical layout, you might see a 1-car garage with one in the driveway, and then that meets the 2 for the requirement. If there's double-car garages, which they might be able to get on some of these, but I don't know that they would on all of them, because some of these are only 20 feet wide as you're coming down. But yeah, they should be able to meet that parking. They'd have a 20-foot setback from the front property line to the garage, where you'd fit one of those parking spots in, and then the one in the garage.
So in this layout here, on the opposite side of the street is it's a side of a single
That's a side
family
on
lot.
there, yeah.
Does that always happen? Because if you're trying to double load those things, I don't see you fitting in phone pads, power transformers, street lights, and space for snow, if it ever snows here again.
Yeah, well, and that's why when you get smaller and smaller in terms of some of the widths, we start asking for these designs that, or these details that show how that's going to function. So as a general rule, single family that's 50 feet or less would have alleys, or townhomes that are 40 feet or less would have alleys. And so on the side that we're talking about over here, where you've got basically 20 to 35 feet, it's definitely getting less than what we would normally have. When you're going through this northern portion, they're above that limit, and on the eastern portion, they're above that. So alleys typically wouldn't be required through here or here, and I think in the central part. But where it kind of comes up is really on this western side and the southern side.
Yeah, and that road C or alley on the south end there, if that's got all of your utilities and your driveways.
Yeah, it's tight in there. We're getting a sidewalk in on at least one side. I hadn't heard anything from Public Works about any concern about getting utilities down through that.
Does that need to have street lighting if it's an alley?
Whereas our standards only apply to the streets themselves, so an alley would be kind of a gray area. We don't light our alleys or require alleys to be lit, so.
It's just poles going to get in the way.
Yes, for the water and sewer, they provide the 20 feet, we can get that in, but the other utilities will be extremely tight.
So dry utilities would have to be either in whatever that is, Road C, private Road C, or on the very south side, right? Dry utility, power and gas.
We'd have to work with that because we can't have them over the public mains.
They wouldn't fit in the alley if you've got sewer, water, and storm.
Right. Yeah. So that's where in 4 Mile Drive, I know there's dry utilities there, so perhaps they'd pull them off of that, then pull them off of the road just north of them. I think that would be something that would definitely need to be looked at in design, because like you said, it's trying to fit a 20-foot or 60-foot road section and cram it down to 20 feet. There's going to be very, very tight.
Can you go to Google Earth and actually after you finish?
Yeah. Okay, let's see where I was at. So here's some of the elevations. These would be the 2-unit townhomes. This is where you can kind of see the garages that would be in there. They would also have some 3- and 4-unit configurations that would be running through. This is the elevation on the clubhouse that we talked about in that Central Park area, as well as the floor plan. And, the floor plan shows, fitness center, sauna, card room, multiple different things for outdoor kitchen that people can utilize in addition to some of the things we talked about with the play area and dog park and so forth. Going over to the other side of the street, what we've been talking about is this area right through here where we've got tree line coming down. That phase 5 and 6, which has been laid out for the apartments, asking for that increase in the numbers that they have there. But this is the layout that you would see with the clubhouse and then the apartment buildings coming down. This would be the elevation drawing they'd have on the apartments, and this would be the clubhouse that they'd be utilizing in there. They weren't changing any, other than the number of units, they weren't changing anything in terms of any deviations or any other prior approvals or conditions that were associated with the apartments.
So this request is for that phase 4 and 5 and 6?
Yeah, so what they're doing is we have preliminary, there's a PUD that covered all of it.
Yeah.
There was preliminary plat for phase 3, came down here. Phase 4, which was roughly in this area towards 4 Mile, which is multifamily, and then phases 5 and 6, which were also multifamily. And what they're doing in terms of the PUD was just increasing the number of units over here, but the main difference was really, I guess, reimagining this central area and going to that townhome type of design for both phase 4 and this future phase 7, instead of having the multifamily in there.
Yeah, I guess I think I understand what's going on. The confusing thing is this is the plat, and because that one lot, the lot to the west is one big lot, it has the apartments on it, but it's not clear that this application, at least from what I've been looking through, it's not clear that this application includes that parcel with that layout.
Okay. I guess where it gets confusing a little bit is that you've got 2 different applications in front of you. So there's the PUD amendment, which would be covering what's shown. This is the preliminary plat that's kind of on the books right now, but it would be covering this phase 4 area, 5 and 6, and then this remainder area. And at the same time, we've got a plat that's coming in, and that plat's limited to just phase 4. So because there's an existing preliminary plat for 5 and 6 that they're just going to build on, they're not going to use all these lot lines, and it's just going to be, I can't remember, if it was 1 or 2 larger lots that would be in there. That's developing under the prior approvals, except for increasing that number from, I want to say it was like about 214 to 288 or something along those lines. But that's rolled into the overall PUD amendment while we're doing the work session, what brings it in front of you, and then also kind of setting the preliminary conditions for phase 7, which was going to be the 65 or so townhomes up in this northern portion. But what we have as far as detail is the phase 4 plat, which is replacing these multifamily lots with the townhome lots, and then expanding into some of that remainder area. So there are some moving parts, and I think that's why it gets confusing until you kind of step through it a little bit.
But there isn't an overall phasing plan. Well, I guess this is.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an overall phasing plan. They've developed phase 1 and 2 and 3, with then this being 4, 5 and 6 and 7. So it's all phased out. We just don't have a preliminary plat for phase 7 at this point.
So that parcel to the west of phase 7, where it says phase 1, that's where the apartments are currently.
Here, right.
Yeah. But it goes all the way down to that lot line there.
Yes, yep. So it goes right up to the bypass property, the right of way.
But it's developed all the way to the top of lot, whatever, that remainder lot 2.
Right here? Yes, yep.
Yeah, that's tree line apartments, 96 units on that
It
piece.
fits into that hole, okay.
Yep.
It just, yeah, it would, it
The,
may,
the real thing is the PUD's gotten more dense, So that's the main gist of the PUD amendment is because the density is going up, and then what was going to be a multifamily area is becoming kind of townhouse, single family.
So I can, in my head, I can put the apartment picture in there, but it might be helpful to have that, because then what's going in that remainder lot one? Other than,
Single family would
other
go in
than,
that.
it just says townhomes,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
there isn't a layout for that, so that's still
There isn't a layout. It's
a
60
blank future, but there is a layout on the apartments, which we don't show on a plat because it's not platted.
It's not platted, that's
Yeah,
just, that would go
okay.
through as a building permit under the PUD. They'll still need to final plat that, because they need, the
they
extension
need
for
to
Tree
finish
Line
those
Road
too.
and all of that to go down. So you'll see a final plat coming in for those phases, and then a building permit for it.
So there are no off-site improvements for any of the things that we're talking about, right? That tree line and its connection all the way through to 4 Mile is part of the current apartment requirement. In order to final plat that, it has to be
Correct.
built and finished.
I think that there were some improvements on 4 Mile that were tied to Phase 4 that would come in with this, but other than that, there wouldn't be any off-site improvements.
Because that extension tree line's under construction right now.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I saw them wailing away out there. Oh. But that's, okay, but I guess what is the condition that says that they have to finish that street now?
their next final plat in that development, whether they went with their old plan or what's next requires that tree line is built with their next final plat.
Okay, so it's the next phase, it's
The
wherever
next
fourth
phase.
phase of development.
Yeah,
Okay.
fourth phase of whether it's the plan they had or this future plan. That's why they're out there, because they'll likely be moving forward with the multifamily here.
And they'll be going through with that initially. So part of that is the infrastructure with phases 5 and 6 is going to support Phase 4. They've got the building permit applications in for or at least architecture review and site review for those apartments.
But tree line is on that apartment phase, right? In terms of it being platted, it's, okay, yeah. See what you guys are doing to me here?
This is what happens when they get 20 years old. You can go up there, that way the public can hear.
Trying to start in the middle of something, figure out what they did, try to pick it up and answer all the questions. We're still going through that. So I'm Todd Whipple. So we are working on a final plat for I can't keep the phases straight, the old 5 and 6, where the apartments are. That will plat, I have to plat that lot to formalize the PUD options on that plat so I can do the apartments, and then that will include the dedication of tree line. So tree line will be dedicated in a one lot plat that will, whatever those numbers are for the apartments, and then tree line will then be done. And then the rest of it will then go in stages per that phasing plan, the southerly piece and then the northerly piece, and then that remainder piece to the north. I think the couple things to remember, we were talking about storm drainage. This site has a PUD pond, and that PUD pond, everybody drains to it. The first apartment project drains to it. Our apartment project drains to it. It was set up and designed for the phases that we're doing for the townhouse plat. The only thing we've done is we've increased the amount of, to some degree, we've increased the amount of impervious area. So what we did as a part of the apartment project, we put in a pond with a discharge to mimic so that we don't overload the PUD pond, quote unquote. And then today I heard about the public-private change on the Z. So that was new today. But it's kind of like everything on this. We're all kind of learning as we go through it. It's the same that I rub my head a lot. And so I have the same question sometimes that you have. And PJ knows, we have a guy in our office, Austin, who I think pesters him about every day. Because he'll come to me and I'll say, well, ask PJ. I don't know what do they want there. I don't know for sure. Because here's what the PUD originally said. Here's what we're trying to make it say. Here's what we're trying to do. And I think in the end, how we have worked it out in our mind is we're keeping the PUD, we're extending it, we're adding a number of units, and we're changing the intent of, we're not going to do multifamily against 4 Mile Road now. We're going to do townhouses and duplexes, basically. twin homes all the way down to whatever that road will be called. And then dry utilities, as it relates, they're not as tight as you would think. We do a lot of townhouses, and so if we have wet utilities in the street, the dry utilities ride on the 10-foot easements outside of the street area run underneath the driveways. And if we have to put transformers, we make room between the driveways and the transformers so that we can get our transformers in the back. We prefer them in the back. The only place we're probably not going to have transformers in the back will be those units on that exhibit that he was showing where we're showing them on tree line. We just couldn't. We're struggling with street trees. And that is as you work in Kalispell with more and smaller lots, as it becomes fashionable or affordable, whichever you want to say, the more the lots narrow down, and you just got to have your water and sewer separation, you got to have a driveway, you need a street tree, and how close can the street tree be to the water service? Those all start to quadratic equation kind of a thing. Gets kind of, how much room do we have left for everything? So, I don't know if that answered that one question plus. Any additional questions? Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's a plat?
What's a plat?
Yeah.
A plat is a legal representation of a lot that's approved by the municipal corporation so that an individual owner can own it. So, state of Montana has a lease from the United States of America, and Montana gave Kalispell a lease to be a city. And so these homeowners are buying land that works its all the way back down because of the way our thing really ends up, that you don't really own it, but you think you do.
Yeah.
Did I say that correct?
Yes.
Okay, kind of jumping back in here. So
So if that's it, I'll set back down. I can come back up if you have more questions. Thank you.
as we mentioned before, when you've got a plan unit development, you can have certain deviations that are requested from the general zoning subdivision design standards. A lot of what you're doing is looking at what functionality is. Sometimes it allows creativity, and there's certain conditions that you can put on a PUD that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in a general standard zoning or a subdivision situation. The deviations that they're looking at here is, I guess there's kind of two bunches that you can put them in. There's some requested deviations relating to property development standards. The existing PUD allows lot area down to 5,290 square feet rather than 6,000 for parent lots. This would kind of clarify that you could have lot sizes down to 1,760 square feet rather than 3,000 square feet for sublots. Lot width currently allows under the existing PUD for 40 feet for detached single family. This would also clarify that sublots could be at 20, which is pretty much what you would expect if you've got a 40-foot single family with a duplex type of a setting. Setbacks, existing again allows for 10-foot front setbacks for single family. Make that clear, we would not apply that to multifamily. And in any situation where you've got a garage, there'd be a 20-foot setback from the property line to the garage. Lot coverage, the existing PUD allows up to 54% lot coverage for single family and allows buildings out to the setbacks on Z lots. There aren't any Z lots in here. There's a specific design up here that were the Z lots. But this would clarify that 54% would be allowed on all the sublots. I would note that all the dimensional standards could apply both in the Phase 4 and the Phase 7 areas. Deviations relating to the alleys and streets would be kind of the next bundle. They're requesting those due to a combination of the topography that they're working with on site and as well as the overall site and just how the rhythm of everything lays out. Deviations they'd be looking for would be one, alleys are typically required when sublots are less than 40 feet in width. Again, that's mostly along tree line right through here that we'd be talking about. Through lots are not typically allowed. again, you'd have that in this area between tree line and that internal road. And again, just stressing that they'd maintain a 20-foot setback off that internal road where the garages come in, so they're not sticking to the street or blocking the sidewalk. Typically, street designs would be 60 feet wide. In that southern portion, you would have that 30-foot alley right away that would be coming through and serving those lots. Houses on minor arterials are not supposed to be oriented to the main road, which would be the ones facing 4 Mile. They would not be accessing 4 Mile, which is the main purpose behind that, and be accessing off of that alley. But that's a standard that is in our subdivision regulations. That was it as far as deviations. Just a couple little things that we would need in terms of additional information as we move forward. One is either the geotech letter, stamped letter that would be saying that the existing findings remain valid, or due to the cuts that they've done on that hillside, potentially updating that geotech report. And the second thing would just be nailing down highway noise mitigation. Anytime we're up against a major arterial, which would be the bypass in this situation, they need to do noise mitigation to keep it at 60 decibels or less at the property lines. When we did the original platting, that was called out, and they'd be incorporating some of the noise mitigation in all likelihood with the same type of sound fence that they've done through the northern half of that. They just need to show that that accomplishes what it needs to for the development of the multifamily, and which presumably would take care of the townhomes that we're talking about here. So that's all that I had with everything. I don't know if there's additional questions that the commission has.
Can you go on Google Earth to Starling real quick? Just exit out. Because I think those lots on 4 Mile, we've done something similar, because I could tell that there's some concerns. Starling has something very similar, and I think if we bring that up.
PJ.
I don't see a date on it.
Yeah.
I mean, if this wasn't recorded, I'd say so.
I just don't remember how wide.
They were similar. They were 30 feet.
You're probably going to want to bring up the Public Works Infrastructure Consortium.
Do we know if there's a light going in at the 4 Mile 93? Since that's a really heavily accessed exit.
4 Mile 93 has.
The bypass, sorry. 4 Mile and 93 bypass. No? Okay.
No.
There would be. They did a TIS, and there isn't anything that's called out specifically on any of those.
The entire frontage of 4 Mile will be upgraded to a city standard curb gutter. Like right now, it's got a bit of a rural section.
Yeah.
But
Where am I at?
right there.
Yeah, right through here.
So that's pretty much what you're looking at. You remember that was the Wooner design that they had done in Bozeman, and so if you want to see it, go out there and look. But even though there's been houses that have been built there since then, you'll see the front doors are actually oriented towards Stillwater, not the backs with the fence. They're oriented differently, and there's kind of a lot of common area open space. Can you mark PJ? So that's also you can see there's like a common area parking right there in the middle, and then there's a green buffer that goes through. So they're somewhat replicating that. And that was, I believe, a 30-foot private alley accessing those houses, which are oriented towards Stillwater. So you can go take a look at it and see, and it really is the exact same, essentially, of how they would be accessed. So it's not, the precedence isn't this development, it's been done here. Difference is, this one is, it does kind of go down and loop through, which, some of the like this is a lot more north-south linear. You don't have any curves going in and out of it for any radiuses as far as fire truck access and stuff, but that certainly.
So will there be any fencing along 4 Mile there, or will the property owners be able to access 4 Mile personally?
Their front yard will go right out to a sidewalk.
Yeah,
on
so they
4 Mile.
will be able to just walk right out there?
Same
I mean,
as
that's
those,
a
same
nice
as those
thing for
houses
them.
on tree line.
Right,
The
yeah.
front door will go right out on the tree line.
I mean, it makes sense to kind of keep the way they're wrapping that around 4 Mile and then tree line. So
So my understanding they'd be able to walk across the landscaping. There is a gap there where there's a common area, so their property wouldn't directly front onto 4 Mile, but be a little bit of a frontage there.
Right, but there's no like neighborhood fence that
No.
stops
I don't think
them or
there'd be any
anything.
fence, but they also wouldn't be able to have individual connections. So one of the things that was called out was those sidewalk connections coming down through the ends of those dead end alleys would extend down and connect into 4 Mile. But just because of the status of that path running through there, they're
And
not
that's,
going to get
that would be open
individual
to the public,
access.
right? I mean, it's private, but the public can walk through
On-
that, right? Or
On which part?
the dead end bits, would they be able to access 4 Mile there or?
Anybody in that subdivision would be able to,
Yeah.
for sure. So, yeah.
Thoughts, concerns, questions?
I guess I have a thought about, it was brought up about the snow plowing, and we know how that can be in the winter. Sometimes, I know you had touched on it, but my question about it is, and maybe we've done this before, but I've been trying to think about where maybe we have, when this does, when this develops out, if it were to go this direction, and all these houses or units on these private streets get sold, and they're not getting, I guess, the HOA plows.
The HOA would plow, yeah, they would plow, they'd maintain, so the homeowners association would be responsible for, if they need to seal coat it, or if they need to chip seal it, or any of that long-term maintenance would be on them. And one of the things that, our subdivision regulations require is that when you do have, whether it's streets or parks or stormwater, is that you have to provide for the long-term maintenance of that with assessments and maintenance obligations called out in the covenants.
We would want that to be very, very, very clear going through the process that it's private, because we have seen in the past, because they're going to be paying city taxes and they're going to be wondering why the city's not paving or plowing their road. And it really boils down, because it's a PUD, and your PUD, it allowed for these deviations which didn't meet our city standards, therefore it was private. And we would want to make sure we delineate that on the plat and on
Right,
the
okay.
staff report, so that if a homeowner does come forward in the future, which we've seen, I believe, was it Fenway? We've had
A
a
lot of
couple
places.
in the past that were intended to be private, that it was maybe a little too gray, and it ended up becoming public, and, they create some maintenance issues for the city long-term. So we would definitely want to make sure that we're protecting the city, because we don't want to be plowing roads that don't work for us,
So if it makes it onto the plat, that language, or if that makes it onto the plat, that would then fall through on, like, say, closing on a unit or something.
Correct.
It'd be a matter of record, yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
And we'd want it to be clear that there was some maintenance responsibilities outlined in their covenants and such. Not that we get involved in their covenants, but they've at least accounted for that as part of their long-term maintenance agreements with all these property owners.
When you say, PJ, that it gets set up so that there is a long-term financial commitment, how does the city audit that? Or do they?
Well, it's a standard plat condition that we would have, and here you probably call it out a little bit more in terms of some of the private ownership, but there would be a plat condition that any of the private, that there would need to be provisions in place to maintain any of the private common areas. And like we mentioned, that would usually kind of primarily come through the homeowners covenants with the assessments. The backup to that is, for some reason there's a failure to do that. Then we also have a standard waiver of protest to special improvement district that we would typically apply for stormwater, parkland, those sorts of things. So we have some fail safes built in there too, if for some reason it's not maintained by the property owners.
So the creation of an SID can then have a per lot annual cost that would then
Goes
be, okay.
Yeah. I would tell them it's a lot cheaper for them to do it themselves than to have us do it. And that's usually an incentive to take care of it. So I don't think that we've had to actually pull the trigger on any of those. But that is the fail-safe in there. So it's not just relying strictly on covenants and them doing it.
And an SID is, it's enforceable, right? I mean, it's
Especially, it's a special taxing district
tax,
that's there.
yeah.
So once city council has to put that in place, and there's protest provisions, which is why on a plat like this, you would have a waiver of that protest in case we did need to implement that. But yeah, it would go right on to property taxes in that situation if it was implemented.
Essentially like an HOA fee.
No, I understand how it works. It's just whether it, as long as it protects the city, because we don't want to end up owning it and having to maintain it without some compensation.
Right.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm just looking at those dead ends on the south side and just, yeah.
Will they have that cleared up before it comes in front of us?
Yeah, I think that we would need to clear that up, and I think one of the driving forces is going to be what fire department thinks of it. What's that? Fire, yeah. Fire being a driving force, and then what the resolution would be on the dead ends as far as the water lines. You know, there's a little bit of competing interest with there too, because, you know, having that open area allows you to push snow out in that area, out that direction too. And so there's some benefits of having it open. At the same time, there's some downsides of it. So figuring out that best resolution we would need to do before we took it forward for a public hearing there.
And the likelihood of connecting those dead ends to 4 miles pretty slim. Not
Yeah,
happening.
You won't.
Okay.
We wouldn't allow
Probably
that.
wouldn't be a
The
good idea.
classification of 4 miles, too high of a classification,
Okay.
and those would all be too close together, so we wouldn't
Yeah,
support
that's what I
that.
thought.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd like to say is I kind of with Rory on the 200-foot requirement. I looked at this and that configuration of those streets looks an awful lot like a subdivision we did where we were required to have that radius. So it's a little different and there's some extenuating circumstances, but I could certainly see why someone might think that, yeah.
This is similar to what we've done. I believe Eagle Valley Ranch, the Future Basins, has some stuff very similar to this. Meadows Edge has some stuff similar to this as
Yeah,
well.
I'm just saying.
Sure.
Anything else? Okay. I guess I'm gonna go ahead and close the work session.
Do we need to give you direction? Say yes, no, or it just,
Maybe, or
it will show up when it shows up, right?
I think